This is a True Crime New Crime Report. The latest on new cases we're following at True Crime Today and the Hidden Killers podcast.
Imagine waking up in a strange mansion, half naked, wearing a leather mask shaped like male genitalia, surrounded by people you've only ever seen on magazine covers. Some cheering, some laughing, others allegedly just watching in stunned silence. That's not the beginning of a bizarre dream or a rejected scene from Eyes Wide Shut. That's the opening claim in one of the most outrageous civil lawsuits filed this year, and it's aimed squarely at Sean Diddy Combs. On April 1st, 2025, a Florida man named Joseph Manzaro filed a lawsuit that reads more like a fever dream than a legal complaint, but it's real and it's public. Manzaro alleges that back in 2015, he was drugged, kidnapped, and sexually assaulted at a so-called freak-off party hosted by Diddy for his then 17-year-old son, Christian. According to the filing, this wasn't just any party. This was a lavish, celebrity-studded bash in Miami that spiraled into something out of a dystopian horror flick. And the details? They're jaw-dropping. Here's how Manzaro tells it. It started with a strange substance smeared on his apartment door. He says he touched it, some kind of greasy, sticky residue, and shortly after, he began to feel dizzy and disoriented. What happened next is a total blackout. When he came to, he wasn't in his home. He was in a palatial Miami mansion. Not just any mansion either. This one allegedly belonged to Diddy, and he wasn't alone. He was surrounded by guests, music, and chaos, the kind of scene you'd expect at a high-profile celebrity birthday party. Except this one took a much darker turn. Manzaro says he was forcibly stripped, bathed by other men, and then made to wear a grotesque leather mask shaped like a penis. That's when he was allegedly paraded through the house as part of the evening's entertainment, humiliated in front of a crowd of partygoers, some of whom, according to the lawsuit, included A-list celebrities like Beyoncé, Jay-Z, and LeBron James. That's right. He names names, big ones, household names. But to be clear, he's not accusing them of participating in any abuse. He claims they were there, they saw him, and they didn't intervene. In one particularly surreal moment described in the complaint, Manzaro says he was pushed into a room where Beyoncé and Jay-Z were seated. He alleges Beyoncé's eyes went wide in disbelief when she saw him in that leather mask, while Jay-Z sat quietly, saying nothing. At another point, he claims LeBron James, who was allegedly wrapped in a towel at the time, took one look at his condition and told someone nearby, "Y'all better do something about that." None of these celebrities are accused of wrongdoing, but their names are in the filing, tied to this story in a way that's now etched into public record. And it gets worse. According to Manzaro, after being paraded around like a sideshow act, he was sexually assaulted by individuals tied to Diddy. Then, when he was physically spent and barely conscious, he was allegedly transported again, this time to a house connected to gang activity. There, he says he was beaten so badly he suffered lasting internal injuries, including permanent damage to his groin. When he finally woke up again, he was dumped somewhere in public, alone and broken. Now, if you're thinking that's too wild to be true, you're not alone. Diddy's legal team certainly agrees. They've called the claims false, vile, and fabricated. In their words, it's the kind of story that no sane person would believe. They've accused Manzaro of seeking a payday through shock value and have promised to fight the lawsuit vigorously. Diddy himself has remained publicly silent about the latest filing, but his lawyers haven't held back. In their official response, they frame Manzaro's lawsuit as part of a disturbing trend, what they call a wave of opportunistic claims targeting their client at his most vulnerable. And there is a context here. Diddy is already facing multiple civil lawsuits, a federal sex trafficking investigation, and a tidal wave of public scrutiny stemming from earlier high-profile allegations. So this new suit doesn't exist in a vacuum. It adds fuel to a fire that's already blazing. But it also stands out for a few reasons. First, the accuser is male. That's relatively new in the spectrum of lawsuits against Diddy. Most previous civil complaints have come from women, many describing long-term abuse, controlling relationships, or industry-related coercion. This one, though, alleges a sudden, brutal, and almost ritualistic experience, something more like a hazing ritual from hell than a pattern of relationship abuse. Second, the lawsuit alleges that this entire event wasn't just a moment of moral collapse, but part of a deliberate, orchestrated criminal enterprise. Manzaro's attorneys described the so-called freak-off as not just a party, but a mechanism for humiliation, control, and exploitation. They claim it's part of a larger pattern involving drugs, sex, and manipulation, all of which they say Diddy used to maintain power, loyalty, and silence. And then there's the witness list. Whether it's true or not, the fact that Beyoncé, Jay-Z, LeBron James, and even Miami icons Gloria and Emilio Estefan are named in this filing instantly launched the story into viral territory. The Estefans are said to have allegedly lived next door, with Gloria reportedly shouting, "Call an ambulance," when she saw Manzaro's condition, only to be hushed by her husband, Emilio. Again, none of these people are accused of doing anything wrong, but their alleged presence adds a level of visibility and credibility to the lawsuit that's hard to ignore. For their part, those celebrities haven't stayed silent. Jay-Z's attorney said he wasn't even in Florida at the time. LeBron's rep called the whole claim demonstrably false, pointing out that LeBron was in the middle of the NBA season with a full schedule of games, and the Estefans issued a flat denial, stating that no such event ever took place at or near their property. It's been a swift and unequivocal rejection across the board. It's still, the internet did what the internet does. Screenshots of the complaint went viral. Rapper 50 Cent, who's never missed a chance to troll Diddy, posted about the suit, writing, "God damn how many of these boys Diddy was touching," next to a screenshot of the court filing. It's ugly, it's loud, and it's got everyone talking. But if you peel away the sensationalism, what's left is a deeply disturbing set of allegations. Allegations that, if true, point to something far more sinister than just bad behavior at a party. This isn't about ego or celebrity excess. It's about power and what happens when people believe they're untouchable. Manzaro's lawsuit claims that Diddy operated like a mob boss at this party, giving orders, watching others carry them out, and then disappearing behind layers of security, money, and silence. And that's the thing. Whether you believe Manzaro or not, the structure of his story fits into a larger pattern we've seen unfold in the entertainment industry over the past few years. These aren't just one-off accusations. They're building into something systemic, something that's hard to ignore. And while Diddy's team insists that every claim against him is fiction, the sheer volume, variety, and specificity of these lawsuits is creating a narrative that's gaining traction. What's especially noteworthy about this case is the timing. It was filed just days after another man, this time a photographer, filed his own lawsuit against Diddy, claiming something very different, but equally disturbing. That case doesn't involve a mansion, a party, or a crowd. It happened behind closed doors, allegedly in a trailer, during a commercial shoot. But it tells another story about coercion, power dynamics, and silence. We're going to get into that next. Because while Manzaro's story is the one grabbing headlines with its bizarre props, celebrity name drops, and horror movie pacing, the quieter accusations might end up being just as significant, maybe even more so. You don't need flashing lights, a Miami mansion, or a celebrity guest list to make a sexual abuse claim land with force. Sometimes it's just a camera, a trailer, and the silence that follows. On March 26, 2025, a man known only as John Doe filed a civil lawsuit in Manhattan Supreme Court that paints a very different picture from the outlandish party described in the previous chapter. This one doesn't feature masks, music, or LeBron James wrapped in a towel. There's no crowd, no freak-off, just a private interaction behind closed doors, and the allegation that Sean Diddy Combs used his influence to coerce a man into a sex act during a professional shoot. According to the complaint, John Doe is a photographer who was working on a high-profile commercial project in New York sometime in late 2022 or early 2023. The exact client or brand hasn't been publicly named, but the setting is described clearly. A production site where Combs was involved and where Doe had legitimate work responsibilities. The two had crossed paths before, the lawsuit claims, but on this particular day, Combs allegedly initiated a more personal interaction, one that, according to Doe, escalated rapidly into coercion. Doe says it started with small talk. Combs struck up a conversation during a break in filming and invited him into his private trailer, supposedly to talk more about photography, career ambitions, and creative opportunities. For someone in the creative industry, especially a freelancer or up-and-coming artist, an invitation like that from a megastar can feel like a golden ticket. But once inside, the conversation allegedly veered off the professional track. The lawsuit describes a sudden and aggressive shift in tone. Once they were alone, Combs allegedly dropped the pretense of mentorship and made an offer that Doe claims he couldn't refuse. The words, as cited in the filing, were unmistakably transactional, something to the effect of, "If you suck it right, I'll make your career take off." It wasn't a flirtation or a joke, according to Doe. It was a demand, a power play, a proposition backed by the implicit threat that refusal wouldn't just be disappointing, it would be damaging. The lawsuit goes on to say that Combs unzipped his pants and expected Doe to comply. Faced with a career-making opportunity on one hand and the fear of losing everything on the other, Doe says he froze. He felt trapped. And ultimately, under that pressure, he did what Combs allegedly asked him to do. The complaint doesn't dramatize this part. It doesn't need to. The power imbalance alone speaks volumes. It's not about a weapon or a locked door. It's about what happens when the person who can open every door in the industry says, "This is how it works." Doe claims he was then expected to return to work like nothing happened. No acknowledgement, no conversation. Just business as usual. He did what he was told, finished the shoot, packed up his gear, and went home. But what lingered was the trauma, the confusion, the shame. He says it took months to process what had happened, and when he finally decided to come forward, it was because he saw the floodgates opening. More people speaking out, more cases being filed, more allegations against Combs making headlines. That, according to the timeline in the complaint, gave him the courage to tell his story. This lawsuit is strikingly different from the one filed by Joseph Manzaro. There's no performance element, no physical violence, no audience. This isn't spectacle. It's subtle, private, and insidious. It doesn't rely on outlandish visuals or shocking props. It hinges entirely on dynamics. Celebrity and aspiring creative, employer and contractor, powerful and powerless. It's a situation that plays out in countless industries, often without headlines or lawsuits. But in this case, the imbalance was allegedly weaponized. The legal implications here are also different. For one, the timing of the incident falls squarely within New York's civil statute of limitations for sexual misconduct. The Adult Survivors Act, which temporarily opened a one-year window for historic abuse claims, doesn't even need to apply. This is fresh, recent, and prosecutable under existing timelines. In addition to the sexual assault claim, Doe's legal team is also signaling potential employment law violations, suggesting that this wasn't just personal misconduct, but an abuse of professional context. That distinction could matter a lot as the case progresses. Diddy's legal team wasted no time responding. In a now familiar statement, they denied all allegations, calling them entirely fabricated. Their public comments framed the lawsuit as another attempt to capitalize on Combs' legal vulnerability and public notoriety. Mr. Combs has never sexually assaulted or trafficked anyone, his attorneys said, echoing the same line they've used in other cases. They emphasize that we live in an era where anyone can file a lawsuit for any reason, and that this case, like others before it, would fall apart under scrutiny. But here's what makes this one harder to brush off. It doesn't rely on 30-year-old memories or celebrity eyewitnesses. It doesn't ask us to suspend disbelief and imagine a party full of megastars watching in silence. It's a quiet, direct claim from a professional alleging abuse of power in a one-on-one setting. That's often harder to disprove and harder to ignore. There's also something to be said about the shift in narrative. Until now, the majority of civil claims against Diddy have come from women, many describing long-term emotional control, physical abuse, and sexual violence in the context of relationships or social environments. But John Doe's case, like Manzaro's, introduces a new element: male accusers. And while the specifics of each story are very different, the pattern they suggest is unsettling. The alleged victims are not linked, their stories don't overlap, but they both describe moments where Diddy allegedly used his fame, wealth, and authority to cross a line and dared the other person to say no. It's important to note that none of these allegations have been proven in court. As of this recording, no trial date has been set in the Doe case. Combs has not been criminally charged in connection with this incident, and the identity of the photographer remains sealed under the pseudonym John Doe, though that may change if the case advances to trial. The court could require the accuser to reveal his real name, something we've seen happen in other similar lawsuits with mixed results. For example, we've already seen what happens when a plaintiff refuses to step into the spotlight. Earlier this week, another civil case against Combs was dismissed, not because the judge doubted the accuser's claims, but because the woman behind them wouldn't reveal her name. Her reasons were personal. Fear, she said. Fear of retaliation, fear of public scrutiny, fear of being reduced to headlines. And in the court's eyes, that wasn't enough to keep her case alive. That dismissal, quiet and procedural, might not make as many headlines as the freak-off suit or the trailer story, but it speaks volumes about the real toll these allegations take on the people making them. What happens when you're asked to publicly relive your worst trauma? What happens when the court demands that you stop being a pseudonym and become a face? It's one thing to file a lawsuit. It's another thing entirely to stand behind it with your full name, face, and identity, especially when the person you're accusing is Sean Diddy Combs. That's the dilemma at the center of a civil case that quietly came to an end on March 31st, 2025. No headlines screaming bombshell, no press conference, no court drama. Just a short notice from a federal judge in Manhattan stating that Jane Doe had failed to comply with an earlier order. Her lawsuit was dismissed. Case closed. But behind that administrative sentence is a much bigger story, one about power, fear, trauma, and the very real barriers that keep some people from ever stepping forward, no matter how serious their claims might be. Let's rewind. Back in October of 2024, Jane Doe filed a federal civil lawsuit against Diddy under New York's Adult Survivors Act, a law that temporarily opened a one-year window allowing survivors of sexual abuse to sue, even if the statute of limitations had already expired. That window closed in late November, so there was a mad dash of last-minute filings in the final weeks. This was one of them. According to the complaint, Jane Doe alleged that Combs sexually assaulted her back in 1995. The incident, she said, took place during a promotional party tied to a music video for the notorious B.I.G., one of Diddy's artists at the time. She didn't claim to be in a relationship with Combs or even well acquainted with him. She said she was there as a young woman, drawn to the excitement of the music industry. But that night, she alleges, she was cornered by Combs in a bathroom at the event, where he raped her. She also alleged that the act was recorded without her consent. The language in the suit was blunt, specific, and harrowing. Now, none of that was litigated. No depositions, no trial, no ruling on whether the allegations were credible or legally sound, because the case never made it that far. From day one, the woman filed under the name Jane Doe. That's common in sexual assault cases, especially when the alleged event happened years or decades ago. The law allows it, but judges still have discretion. And in this case, the federal judge assigned to the matter, Louis J. Lyman, eventually said, "That's not going to fly." In early March of 2025, Judge Lyman issued an order. Jane Doe had to amend her complaint and refile it under her real name. She had until March 20th to do it. If she didn't, the case would be dismissed. The clock ticked. March 20th came and went. No updated filing, no public statement from the plaintiff. Just silence. Then, on March 31st, the judge made it official. The lawsuit was dismissed. Not for lack of evidence, not because of some motion to strike, just because the accuser didn't or couldn't attach her name to the story. And that tells you something about the stakes. You might be wondering why anonymity matters so much. Why does a name make or break a case? Shouldn't the facts speak for themselves? In theory, yes. But the legal system isn't just about facts, it's about process. And that process gives both sides the right to face their accuser. It's a core principle in both criminal and civil law. When you file a lawsuit, especially one as serious as sexual assault, you're accusing someone of misconduct that could destroy their reputation, their career, even their livelihood. The court's job is to make sure that accusation is tested in a fair and open forum, and that usually means both parties come to court with their names, their lawyers, and their evidence on the table. Still, there are exceptions. Courts sometimes allow pseudonyms in cases where the plaintiff can prove that using their real name would expose them to undue harm. We've seen this before in high-profile sexual abuse cases, especially involving minors or where there's a credible threat of retaliation. But in this case, the judge wasn't convinced. He wanted a name. The plaintiff declined, so the lawsuit died on a technicality. Her attorney, Tony Busby, later explained her decision. He said she was afraid, not just nervous or uncomfortable, afraid. Afraid of retaliation, afraid of media exposure, afraid of being dragged through the mud in the press and on social media. Busby said that fear wasn't unique to her. In fact, according to him, she was one of over 100 people who reached out with potential claims against Combs in the wake of earlier lawsuits. Many of them, he said, expressed interest in filing. But when it came time to go public, they couldn't do it. That hesitation speaks volumes about the kind of pressure survivors face, especially when their alleged abuser is someone rich, famous, and legally well-defended. It's one thing to speak your truth. It's another to do it under oath in a courtroom with TMZ and the New York Post circling like vultures. Every tweet, every paparazzi photo, every out-of-context quote, those become weapons in the fight to discredit you. It's not just a legal battle, it's a PR war. And for someone without money, power, or a publicist, it's terrifying. Busby didn't fault the judge. He understood the legal standard, but he also made it clear that this was a lose-lose situation for many accusers. She wants justice, he said, but she doesn't want to be publicly shredded to get it. And so her silence became her shield, but also her undoing. Meanwhile, Combs' legal team wasted no time in framing the dismissal as a victory. They issued a statement highlighting that this was now the second lawsuit brought by Busby's office that had been dismissed. They painted a picture of collapsing cases, false narratives, and a rush of frivolous filings from opportunistic lawyers. They didn't say much about the anonymity issue. They didn't have to. The case was gone. That was enough. It's worth pointing out, too, that this isn't the only lawsuit where anonymity is being challenged. Other Jane Does and John Does who filed against Combs are facing similar court orders. Judges are increasingly pushing plaintiffs to identify themselves if they want their cases to move forward. That means more plaintiffs will be forced to make a choice, go public or go home. And for some, that decision will come down to safety. For others, it'll be about shame, trauma, or the emotional toll of having to relive their story in front of a skeptical public. It's easy to say, if it really happened, why wouldn't you come forward? But that ignores the layers of resistance people face, especially when the person they're accusing is someone who built an empire on charisma, influence, and strategic silence. What this case shows, more than anything, is the fragile balance between access to justice and the courage required to pursue it. The legal system gives survivors a path forward, but it's not an easy one. You have to be ready to fight on multiple fronts, legally, emotionally, publicly, and even then, there are no guarantees. Jane Doe's lawsuit didn't end with a settlement, or a vindication, or a dramatic courtroom verdict. It ended in silence. Not because she didn't have a story to tell, but because she wasn't willing to tell it under the spotlight. And that spotlight, it's not going anywhere.
You just made it through an episode of Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Congrats on surviving the ads. Want to skip them completely next time?
What is that?
Join the True Crime Today Premium Plus channel on Apple Podcasts. Ad-free episodes, exclusive early access, and no interruptions. Just pure crime storytelling. Try it free for 3 days. Don't wait.
Bitchin' stuff, dude.
Hit subscribe now on Apple Podcasts and get ahead of the mystery.
Know what I'm saying?